Hello and welcome to the daily newspaper analysis. Today we shall be discussing the newspaper of the 22nd of January 2018. So coming to the first article, profit and loss. The opinion is that the disqualification of AAP MLAs is a legal question and not a political one. So as obvious, the context of the article is that of the 20 MLAs of Aam Aadmi Party have been disqualified for holding an office of profit. Now, before we begin the discussion, I would like to mention that in UPSC, the question will never be a political one. They will never ask you what happened in Delhi, how many MLAs were removed, but rather the question will be about an understanding of the topic, and the basics is what is important. So this is the part that you should focus upon. The background of this topic, what do you understand by office of profit? What are the provisions as per which one can be disqualified? So that is the analysis where your focus should be. So let's begin. First and foremost is the question of disqualification of MPs and MLAs. Now you need to understand that once a person has been elected to the parliament or to the state legislatives, he has immense powers that are given to him. He is considered even supreme to the bureaucracy. So in such a scenario, definitely a lot of provisions are there for providing a lot of security and powers to the MPs and MLAs, but the constitution also calls for certain provisions as per which they can be disqualified. Now, as per article 102 of the constitution, the provisions for disqualification of MPs is what is enumerated, and under article 191 of the constitution, the provisions for disqualification of MLAs have been enumerated. These are basically four provisions. The first is that if an MP or MLA holds an office of profit. Second provision is if he is of an unsound mind. The third provision is that if he is an undischarged insolvent. And the fourth provision is that if he is not an Indian citizen or if he voluntarily gives up Indian citizenship. In all these four cases, he shall be disqualified from being an MP or an MLA. Now, amongst these four provisions, the first provision, which is that of an office of profit, is the most confusing. Why is it most confusing? Is because the constitution only says that a person who is holding an office of profit shall be disqualified. There is no explanation or clarity about what will constitute an office of profit, and if it is who will decide as to if it is an office of profit. So all these issues are something that have not been deliberated upon, and so this leaves us a loophole, and this constitutional silence has resulted in a lot of misuse of this provision of office of profit. So definitely this is a contentious provision. Now, as I mentioned that the constitution is silent on it, also the Representation of People's Act 1951 is silent on it. So the definition of office of profit is something that is obtained from the various court judgments which have been given in this regard. So a broader understanding, you can say that an office of profit is a position with certain duties that are more or less of public character. So if the person who's accused of holding an office of profit is holding that office under the government itself, under the executive itself, in such a scenario it should be considered as an office of profit. So this is some basic understanding that you require. There are some criteria as per which it will be considered office of profit. This is again as per Supreme Court judgments. Firstly, there should be an office associated. Further, there should be some profit that is coming from this office. Thirdly, this office should be under some government, either the union government or the state government. So in such a scenario, it will be considered as an office of profit. Further, it will be considered as an office of profit if it has not been included in a law which exempts certain offices. So if it does not have a legal backing to it. For example, one might consider that, for example, the Prime Minister of India is himself an MP, and he is also holding this office under the executive. Also the ministers, all ministers are largely MPs and they are holding offices. So definitely, why are we not considering their office as office of profit? Because definitely they have an office, they are getting a salary for it. Also, this is an office under the union government or the state government. Now the issue is here, because a law has been passed by the government which excludes certain offices, which exempts certain offices to be considered as offices of profit, and it is as per this that the ministers and the Prime Minister are not considered as holding office of profit. So this is the basic understanding. Now coming to the underlying principle, why does the constitution calls for a disqualification for holding office of profit? Is to ensure a separation of power between the legislative and the executive. Now, the constitution initially did not envisage the role of the MPs as agents of executive. For example, if an MP is made a chairman of a particular office which the Prime Minister is controlling, the appointment for which is done by the Prime Minister. In such a scenario, the MP will always be a yes man to the Prime Minister. He will never be free to give his opinion in the parliament, even if it is calling for criticism of the prime minister. For example, a decision can be taken by the prime minister to have his son as his successor. In such a scenario, the MP should be free and he should object to such policies by the government. So this kind of a thing is, it is in line with these things that the idea of office of profit was implemented. So that is what is the importance of that is what is the underlying principle of having a disqualification under office of profit. Now coming to some previous cases, in the year 1953, the first time MLAs of the Madhya Pradesh Legislative Assembly were disqualified for holding an office of profit. The matter again came up in the year 2006. This was the most important ruling of the Supreme Court in this regard. Here, Mrs. Jaya Bachchan was disqualified from the Rajya Sabha for holding an office of profit as chairperson of the UP Film Development Council. So it is in this regard that the Supreme Court had given a judgment. In that judgment, the Supreme Court had said that if the office carries with it or entitles the holder to any pecuniary gain other than reimbursement of out-of-pocket expenses, then the office will be considered as an office of profit. Now, what do you understand by the Supreme Court judgment? In this case, Mrs. Jaya Bachchan had said that she has not even charged a single penny from the UP government for being the chairperson of the UP Film Development Board, and in that case her office should not be considered as an office of profit. But the Supreme Court had asserted that it is not only about a monetary gain, rather any other form of pecuniary gain associated with this office is something that is going to be considered as the office of profit, and in that regard her qualification was cancelled. So that is one analysis which was important. Also, recently in 2015, two MLAs from Uttar Pradesh were disqualified for holding office of profit. So this is the entire background of the office of profit. Now coming to the issues which are important in this particular case, in this editorial which have been mentioned, the first is that of a legal issue. Now what has happened, especially with the AAP government, is despite the fact that the government had 20 parliamentary secretaries, this is not happening exclusive to Delhi. This is a trend that is prevalent in many states. Why has the matter been raised specifically to Delhi is because of a legal issue. Here, the AAP party, the Aam Aadmi Party, had failed to make a law which provided this exemption to the parliamentary secretaries from being considered as under the ambit of the office of profit. So this is one issue. Also, you need to understand that in Delhi, unlike other states, the lieutenant governor also has some extra powers. This is under Article 239AA. Now, if he has these extra powers, so in such a scenario, the law that the government passed retrospectively after the issue was raised, this law was not passed by the lieutenant governor. Further, the law went to the president, and the president also did not pass this law. So this entire issue snowballed in Delhi because this law could not be passed. So that is one issue that you need to understand. Another thing is that you need to understand the motive here. The motive is an unwelcome one, because as per the 91st Amendment Act of the Constitutional Amendment Act, there is a provision that all legislative bodies can have ministers to a strength of only 15% of the total strength of the House. So by that provision, the number of ministers are reduced and check is maintained, so that the tendencies of the legislative to really expand the ministerial councils is something that was an unhealthy one. It was impacting the exchequer. So to check that, this limit was bestowed. And Delhi being a union territory, it was allowed to only have 10 ministers. So in that respect too, this motive of the government is an ulterior one, because to bypass this constitutional provisions, they appointed 20 parliamentary secretaries. So this motive is something that is important in this regard. Another thing is that of an ethical question, which is of duty versus interest. Now, the personal interest of the MLAs in this case is definitely to garner more power and to get better benefits. So they have favored that they should get appointed as parliamentary secretaries. But this is against their duty, because their duty as legislators is to maintain checks on the executive. So how can they become a part of the executive if they want to ensure their duty aptly. So that is one analysis. Now this article definitely is of utmost importance from polity point of view. Definitely in GS paper 2 you can expect a question from this issue, but this example I would really suggest for ethics also. In ethics you can use this example, then how a question between duty versus personal interest is something that is of importance. So definitely I would suggest that this should be used there. Now coming to the next article, capacity building for primary health care. The opinion is that a pluralistic and integrated medical system remains a solution worth exploring. The context, as obvious, is the recent National Medical Commission bill, which has been mooted to replace the Medical Council of India. Now, the issue that this editorial is largely focusing on is about allowing the Ayush practitioners to cross-practice allopathy. So that is the issue. Several articles have been discussed on this issue previously also, but some new points have been mentioned here. So we shall be focusing on that. First and foremost is that of a low doctor-patient ratio. As we all know that in India, the norm is that the figures are that there is one doctor available for every 1700 patients. This is contrary to the WHO norm, which advocates that one doctor should be available for every 1000 patients. So this itself is showing that there is a huge lack of doctors within the country. Not only that, these doctors are largely concentrated more in the urban areas. So this ratio was even worse and even skewed in the rural areas. So the low doctor-patient ratio is definitely a pressing problem for India. As the educated MBBS doctors are unwilling to serve in rural areas, the problem further worsens. So that is one analysis. Second issue is that of rising burden of chronic diseases within the country. This is making a much more favorable case for enhancing and widening the cadre of health providers within the country. It is unacceptable that even in the present times, despite 70 years of independence, children are still dying of diseases like diarrhea. And this is something that is not welcome for India. This is not in the interest of India's claims to become a global leader. So in that respect, definitely a newer cadre of practitioners is what is needed. Another aspect is that, as I mentioned, there is an urgent need for trained cadre. This is something that has been again and again advocated by many policies of the government. This is largely in the interest of the primary health centers. Now, this is one analysis which I would like to suggest here. The primary health centers has certain specific and basic functions. For example, it focuses on covering minor ailments. For example, as I mentioned before, diarrhea. Another thing is it aims at promoting health promotion services like sanitation, washing of hands, these kind of precautions to certain diseases. So these kind of services are provided by the primary health center. Another is that it ensures risk screening for early disease detection, and also it aims at referring of patients to higher centers. So these functions that the PHC are performing is very basic, and the suggestion that the government is giving is to prepare this newer cadre of Ayush professionals, largely with the interest of strengthening the primary health care within the country. So no objection should be raised to this issue, because these Ayush professionals are very much apt to plug this loophole of primary health care in the country. So that is one analysis which has been drawn in this particular editorial. Now, as I mentioned before, the calls for this policy has been given by various experts and various committees. For example, the National Health Policy of 2017 also called for this. It said that there is a need for a multi-dimensional mainstreaming of Ayush professionals. And it also gave a figure that there are at present 7.7 lakh registered Ayush professionals, and they can plug a huge gap in healthcare system. That is one analysis. Another thing is that in some states, for example, states like Assam, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Uttarakhand are already using their Ayush professionals in their primary health centers. This is a part of the human resource rationalization strategy. So if it is already happening in some states, one should draw studies and one should advocate it in other states also. Further, the fourth Common Review Mission Report 2010 of the National Health Mission, also the Shelja Chandra report by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, have all called for ensuring this shift of Ayush professionals through a bridge course into the mainstream healthcare providers. So that is one analysis that has been given. Another aspect is with regards to the objectives of universal health care, which has been mooted in the National Health Policy 2017. Now, to ensure this objective of universal health care, it is this wide changes in the policy of the government is something that is much needed, and there is a need to ensure capacity building, not only of health providers or like doctors who are the Ayush professionals, but also at a lower level. The author here is advocating that there is a need for enhancing the capacities of the nurses, the auxiliary nurse midwives, the rural medical assistants. And it is important that all of these are streamlined into the main medical system, and it creates a cadre of a mid-level service providers who are below the doctors to ensure a comprehensive primary care services, especially in the rural India. So definitely this idea of a bridge course for Ayush professionals is something that has time and again been reiterated by experts, and the benefits of it have all been coming in several editorials, so you can use this opinion in your answers as well. Now coming to the next article, Time for Clarity. The opinion is that the center must share details of what has been happening at Doklam. Now the context of the article is that it has been 5 months after the 73-day standoff at Doklam, and recently there have been statements by the Army Chief and the Ministry of External Affairs which are reflecting that all is not well in Doklam. Now coming to some background, you should have some geographical understanding. Now this region here, this is Sikkim and this is Bhutan. Now this region between Sikkim and Bhutan is ideally Tibet, but as you all know that Tibet is occupied by China, so it is under the control of China. But in your maps, I would suggest that you should write Tibet only, because India recognizes Tibet and India does not acknowledge Chinese occupation of this region. So that is why I would suggest that in your maps you should use the word Tibet only. Now this region here, this is the Doklam Plateau. This is a plateau in the Chumbi Valley. Both China as well as Bhutan are claiming that Doklam Plateau belongs to each of these. Now China says that China has official control over this region for a long time, but Bhutan says that this region is within the Bhutan territory. Now two more regions I have mentioned is, one is the Jakarlung and the other is Pasamlung. These are two regions again in Bhutan which China has occupied, and China is trying to bargain a deal with Bhutan, where China is saying that in return for these two regions, Bhutan should leave all claims on this region, that is the Doklam Plateau. Now what is the significance of this entire region? This area, first you have to understand, is something called the Chicken Neck Corridor of India, the Siliguri Corridor. It is through this small region, small corridor, that India is connected to its northeast, and if any aggression is done in this region and this region is cut off from India, then India is going to lose all of its northeast. So this area is of utmost strategic importance to Indian military. So China wants to have a direct control over this region, and if China gains exclusive controls on the Doklam Plateau, in that case China will become much more capable of cutting off this region. So this is the cause of concern for India. This is the entire background of this particular issue. Now what are the issues that have come in the aftermath of this standoff? There have been 5 months since this standoff has been declared to be over between the two countries, but some issues are emerging again. The first issue is that of quiet diplomacy. Now definitely you have to understand that in such sensitive issues, quiet diplomacy is something that has been welcomed and has been even professed by several experts. It helps solving these issues without politicizing them. So definitely there are advantages. But the concern with this is that now, after the successful implementation of this policy, there are now diverging statements which are having impacts on the people, and they are fueling speculations amongst the citizens of the country. Because after amicably resolving this issue, both China and India are giving diverging statements from their past statements. So that is one cause of concern. And issues are again raised that how valid is quiet diplomacy if it is not a sustainable one. So that is one analysis. Another thing, as I mentioned, is that of public confidence in the government, especially in the backdrop of diverging media reports. Now there are several media reports where photographs are being issued of how China has made several inroads into this region, of Chinese establishments in such region. Now if in such a scenario the government is going to be ambiguous and it is not going to come out with a clear stand, then in such a case the public confidence in the government is something that is going to get eroded, especially of the vulnerable population in this region is who are going to get more impacted. So the government should give a clear policy statement. It should take a clear stand. It should enhance and upbuild the confidence of the people, So that is one analysis important here. Another thing is that of coordination between different government agencies. Now it is often seen that, as in this case also, that the army chief is giving one statement and the Ministry of External Affairs is not collaborating with this statement. So this provides a lack of clarity, and this also reflects that there is a lack of coordination between the government agencies, which cannot be expected on a matter as serious as the Doklam standoff. So definitely this is an example of this lack of coordination. Many a times in various articles you will see this point highlighted, so this can be used as an example there. Also, another analysis which is important is that the army chief has called for shifting of focus from the western borders to the eastern borders. Now, a debate on this has arisen, and I'm sure several editorials in future will be coming in this regard. The western border is also at unrest. Our border with Pakistan is seeing severe bombings, severe actions by the army, and also entry of several militant entries are happening. So that is one cause of concern in the western border. But the army chief reiterating that focus has to now shift on the eastern border is something that is important, and definitely something to be considered and debated upon. So that is one analysis. Now the opinion here that has been given is that India needs to ensure caution in its step and consistency in its statement. So that is the entire analysis of this particular editorial. Definitely the issue of Doklam standoff is of much importance to India-China relations. So that is the analysis here. Now coming to this next article, a misleading story of job creation. Now the opinion is that India does not create 55 lakh new jobs every year as claimed by a new report. Now this article is largely a political one. The Prime Minister has recently in one of his interviews reiterated that India has created 55 lakh new jobs. This was as per a survey of based upon the Employees Provident Fund. So this is what has been criticized too by the author here, who is Mr. Jairam Ramesh. He was a minister. He was a union minister in the previous UPA government. So definitely political insinuations are there, but some points are important. So I'm going to restrict myself to those points. The first is that of formalization versus job creation. Now here the author is bringing about an analysis that in the aftermath of the GST implementation as well as demonetization, there has been a shift in job formalization, and this is something that is being acknowledged as job creation. So the author is saying that it is not a job creation, but only that a large number of jobs have become formalized because of the greater transparency that these two moves have brought about. So the employers were forced to ensure that their employees were formalized and they were brought under the ambit of the Employees Provident Fund organizations. That is one analysis that is important. Another thing is that the government is only focusing on job creation, and in fact is even giving wrong figures like 55 lakh new jobs, which cannot be reiterated and cannot be acknowledged on the ground. So that is one analysis, but the government has not given any figure upon the job losses which have happened in the aftermath of these two events. There is a huge cry by experts that demonetization led to a lot of people losing their jobs because of a lot of people were in the informal sector and they were paid through cash, and because the government prohibited, because of the fact that the government implemented demonetization and cash became scarce, in such a scenario a large number of people lost their jobs. So there is no official data on how many people lost their jobs. So that is something that is important here. Another thing is that of case of increased bank deposits. Now here the author has given a good analysis where he says that in the aftermath of demonetization, the deposits in the banks increased by many folds, and if that expansion in deposits of banks is something that was largely because of the fact that due to demonetization people had to deposit their money in the banks. Now this should not be considered and it should not be misrepresented as an increase in the wealth of the people, because on the ground this is not a reality. So this is one analysis that the author is drawing, that similarly if the numbers of people holding EPF accounts have increased, so it is largely because these job holders have become formalized rather than it is a job creation. So that is something that the author has brought about. Another aspect, which is the most important aspect, is that the focus should be on the bigger picture of job creation. This misjudgment by the government that there have been 55 lakh new jobs is something that is misguided, and because of this wrong information, the government should not lose its focus on the bigger picture of job creation, which is a major problem in the economy today. And the focus should be on this. And by giving these wrong figures, the government shouldn't take an escapist route. So that is what is the analysis. As I mentioned, only few points are important here. The article is not of much relevance. So with this, we finish today's discussion. I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.